Welcome to the Out of Your Comfort Zone podcast. On today's episode, we'll be speaking to two students about their experience studying abroad as Black Americans in Spain and Botswana. Hi, and welcome to our episode of the Out of Your Comfort Zone podcast. Today, we have two students joining us. We have Madison and Carter, both students from California who studied abroad last summer. Madison studied in Seville, Spain, and Carter studied in Gaborone, Botswana. The topic of our podcast today is the Black experience abroad. So studying abroad in different continents as a Black student. And I have to say that this podcast idea came to fruition because Daniel, who is one of our GEAs and who is going to moderate the discussion today, did an in-person panel with Madison and Carter a few months ago and was so blown away by their discussion on that panel and really wanted to bring this discussion to a wider audience. And we here at CIEE believe it's a really important discussion to be had. And I think it's especially now as students are preparing to go abroad for the summer of 2024, it's going to be super helpful for our students to hear before they depart, right? To hear your experience and to get your insight. So thank you to both you, Madison and Carter, for being here. And thank you again, Daniel. Daniel is one of our GEAs. He's one of our sales managers and also based in California. And he is going to moderate the discussion today. So I'm going to hand it over to Daniel.
All right. Hello, my name is Daniel Velasquez, as was said, and these two students were very influential in helping us have a super successful year on their campus. So Venice High School is what's called a Global Navigator School, which means that they get earmarked scholarship funds, and we send a lot of students there year over year. So just some stats that I don't know if Carter and Madison have heard, but thanks to your help, all the times that we presented at your school to your peers, we have 93 open apps at your school. We had 29 students that were offered over $100,000 in scholarships to go abroad this year. And that's on you. That's on you guys for presenting alongside of me, for talking about your experiences and sharing this opportunity with your peers. And it's going to change lives. It's going to be impactful, just like it was impactful for both of y'all. And that's what we're here to talk about. Also, I just want to address that I'm Afro-Chicano. So my mom is Black and my dad is Mexican-American. So my experience with being Black abroad is kind of more like Black adjacent. But I do consider myself Black and I do travel with my Black family. So while we are talking about this, I'm not an expert by any means. And that's why we're super glad to have you guys here with us today to talk about your experiences and everything that it was like in your time in abroad. Just to start off, we'll just like kind of move through the whole process from when you heard about it, how you heard about it, how you took it home, what it was like abroad, and what was it like coming back. So can you both tell me when you first heard about this opportunity? Oh, maybe
Hi, I'm Carter. As was said, I went to Gaborone, Botswana for CIEE thematic study abroad program last summer in the first session. And how I heard about the program was Mr. Velasquez came into my Mandarin class in the fall semester of last school year. And he said, oh, there's an opportunity to study abroad. And I was looking at the different places and I was like, I had heard about many of my classmates going to different parts in Europe or other parts of the world, but none of them had really gone to Africa. So really seeing that Botswana was an option really caught my mind.
Hi, my name is Madison, and I studied in Sevilla, Spain, with the Honors Language and Culture program through CIEE. And I first heard of the program in the fall of 2021 when I was a sophomore. And actually, I heard it from our Italian teacher who was like the sponsor with CIEE. And it really opened my mind. And I knew a few students that were traveling that summer, and it seemed like a great opportunity to learn and to immerse myself in another culture.
Shout out to Ms. Wilcox, probably like one of my favorite people to work with. Just an awesome teacher at Venice, an amazing educator and a cool person. So I'd like to just hone in a little bit more about program choices. So Carter, you were talking about, you heard a lot of people going to the same kind of places. And then I remember you telling me in person too, that you were kind of thinking about like off the beaten path. Did anything about your identity or Africa as a continent or Gaborone as a country specifically appeal to you and why you chose to go there?
Well, it's similar to what I said about the off the beaten path. It's like I had not really been exposed to different cultural aspects of the cultures in Botswana or any in really the southern part of the African continent. So that was appealing, but also as far as the destination, when I looked at the program, I was like, okay, you'll be more out there with the wildlife. And since I'm from LA, a very urban area, most of my schooling experience has been in the classroom. I've obviously gone on field trips, so I'm like, I'd like to have a different, also educational experience where I'm out there or with the animals.
Yeah, and then how did language tie into it? So you were in a Mandarin class. That's one of the coolest things about you guys at school. When I go into to like the immersion classes, and I see like a super diverse group of students speaking in Mandarin. The first time I was in that one of your guys' classes like that, I was like, oh, this place is so cool. I love California. That's what I was feeling. So how did that tie into wanting to go to Botswana? I mean, are you in a dual immersion for Mandarin? Do you speak any other languages? Were you worried about learning a language in Botswana?
No. So about Mandarin, I've learned it. I've been with like the same group of students in that class since kindergarten. Like it's been a path from elementary school all the way now through high school. In fact, there were like 90 of us in the total class when we started in kindergarten. And it's just people have left throughout the years. I guess because of my experience learning the language, I was not necessarily fearful of learning about a new culture or learning a new language in Botswana. And I was even debating going to Taiwan since I'd get to see the things that I learned about. But I was just debating between Taiwan and Botswana. I was like, I'm really just more interested in Botswana as a destination. But I was really excited because of my experience learning about another culture.
Nice. Can you just introduce yourself in Mandarin real fast?
你好，我叫卡特。对，你好，我叫卡特，我是威尼斯高中11年级的同学。上学期我跟 CIEE 去波斯坦纳。
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, for sure. All right, Madison. Y nosotros podemos hablar en español, ¿no?
No.
Same thing, just from the top. Like, what pushed you to choose Seville or Spain? There's a couple different Spanish options. Why this one specifically, and why honors specifically?
Definitely. So I started speaking Spanish in kindergarten as like Carter. I was in a dual language immersion program, but for Spanish instead. So that pathway led me all the way up into high school, and as wanting to pursue like Spanish, as in like my fluency, being able to speak to others. That's a big push as to why I went to Spain. They do have programs in the Northern Hemisphere, like in Mexico and here. But I wanted to experience Europe and Spain because my teacher, she was from there, and she had just always talked about growing up there and her experiences. And I wanted to kind of tie that into somebody who had like a big influential part in my learning experience with Spanish. So I definitely think speaking another language has opened up like my mind and my horizons to a different culture, people, and also just the incentive to go out and learn more because, learning never stops, whether it's in the classroom or elsewhere. So that's why I chose Sevilla and class.
All right. And could you say what like an honors program is for the folks that maybe haven't heard?
And so the honors program is for students that have like an advanced proficiency or advanced skill set in the language prior to traveling the country. And since I had finished more than 4 years of the target language, I was able to apply and then get accepted into the honors language and culture program.
Awesome. Nice. And so when you heard about this stuff at school, you decided where you wanted to go. Then you had to kind of do what I do, which is convincing and informing, but you had to do that for your families. So what was that like when you took this kind of opportunity and idea home?
So definitely, like, I think my relationship with my mother and my relationship with my family was definitely a big push and a big motivation for me to go, because my mom has always encouraged me to want to learn and pursue like stuff that I didn't even think was possible for myself. And that's why I started with Spanish. And so definitely the conversation that I had with her were very motivating. She was very excited for me. She's trying to live vicariously through me during my trip. And I appreciate it, because without her, I know she set me up to be able to problem solve, think for myself, critical thinking, and just overall be successful in another country. And I had traveled before, just local, like in my country, but definitely this is my first time out of the country, first time in Europe, first time speaking another language for an extensive period of time. So it was definitely hard, because I think financials were the biggest factor into where I would be able to study abroad. But at the end of the day, we made it work, and I'm grateful for it.
How about for you, Carter? What was it like taking it home?
Like Madison, this would end up being my first time out of the country, and I initially didn't really think that my parents would let me do it, especially because I love them, and they're really protective of me. They really want me to be safe, so I thought they'd be more worried about me being in another country. But I told them about it. I said why I was interested, how I learned about it. They were open to the idea. They said, my parents said that they would consider, and they really said that they thought it would be a good experience for me. Obviously, there would be multiple factors to consider like finances, and they're like, hey, if you earn it, we will let you go, since I know this is something you really want to do. So initially, they were just worried, and they really wanted to make sure that I'd be safe. But other than that, they were like, hey, this is something you want to do. I think it would be a good experience for you.
And then for both of you, did identity, being Black, did that come up at all when you were talking to your parents about location you were choosing or international travel in general?
Yes, this ended up being true what they said. It was like, hey, your experience might be different than maybe the average American tourist or someone who's not Black, because this will be one of your first times where you're part of the majority. Because even though Los Angeles is a very diverse city, I'm still a minority. So they said, hey, that would be different. But other than that, they said just acknowledge it's different, going with a certain expectation that you might have a different experience. But other than that, it was nothing.
I think mindset was a very important part of kind of like my whole attitude studying abroad. I kind of knew that I would be like the minority in the country, because most of it's Spaniard, very European, and I was. So it definitely was a little bit of it's an adjustment period, but it's not like anything I'm not used to here in Los Angeles or California. But people were surprised when I was able to communicate with them. And it's just like, as much as it was a learning experience for me, it was also a learning experience for other people who may not experience like a Black American traveling abroad, especially being so young. So I definitely think, whole mindset thing. But I found my country to be beautiful and very open to learning about people. I loved my host family. And so that really is why I kind of thrived and was able to be as successful.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to dissect a little bit more, Carter, that whole part of, for maybe the first time in your life being part of the majority. What was that like in your interactions with people day to day? And was there a difference in what your cohort was experiencing? What was like kind of the makeup ethnicity wise of your cohort that was there with you?
So I was the only Black person. Well, actually, no, I take that back. I think there was someone who may have been Afro Chicano as well. Other than that, I believe I was the only Black person. There were some white and Asian people with me on that trip. On a day-to-day basis, I think even though I was Black, like most of the country, I was still a bit lighter skinned. I was still American. I still had to learn the language. It didn't impact most of my day-to-day interactions, but the main thing I remember was that we went to this private school one day, and I just felt like maybe because I had looked more like the people that kids there had seen more often, they just seemed a bit more interested in meeting and getting to know my white friends. I wasn't treated poorly. It's just I could tell they wanted to like hang out with them a bit more. But interestingly enough, when we went to a public school, the kids seemed to want to interact with me more than anyone else. So those were two interesting outlying situations. But especially when I interacted with adults, I don't think it was too different.
Similar question for you, Madison. As far as like differences between your peers, people with you on the program, what did you feel with that in your day-to-day interactions with folks?
So I was like Carter. I was like one of like two like dark-skinned students there. The majority of my peers were, I would say, Hispanic, white, somewhere like of Asian background. So I definitely think that we're all Americans, so that was already something that we can all share common. We're all high schoolers, so that there wasn't a barrier there. But I did see when we would go out in public how like interacting with the public would be different for everybody. And when we got to meet other Spanish high school students that were there, just kind of like the difference in cultural and how we would approach things. And yeah.
I really like what both of you said kind of about being ambassadors as well and like helping teach those that you're coming in contact with about United States, about being Black in the United States, about being from Southern California, and how different people were open to that. And were you expecting that when you were ready to go abroad? Were you expecting to be like an ambassador from the States, or were you expecting more just to be learning as opposed to teaching?
I expected to be asked somewhat about what life was in the States. I did expect more, a lot more learning, which did happen, but I did have some really interesting conversations about the United States. And one thing I found interesting was how some things may have been like just maybe a bit exaggerated in the media, like, oh, you don't have to worry about this on a daily basis. Oh, you really don't eat this on a daily basis. And it was just things like that. But I did expect to be a bit of an ambassador because just like with, what we experience here in the States, what you hear about another culture or another country or another place isn't necessarily going to be the complete truth most of the time. So I expected to speak on the United States.
I agree. During my program, we talked about a lot of stereotypes and the difference between American culture and Spanish culture. And I could see that when I was like talking to people on the streets and how they would be surprised when I said something that they didn't agree with, like that's customary in the United States. So it's also about like I had to throw all of like my preconceived notions of what I thought Spain was going to be out the window. Like, oh, you're here now. Like this is the truth. This is the real. This is the day to day. So I learned more about like culture shock and just being receptive and open to learning about different people and different things, because life there is not like life here. And that's a big takeaway.
Yeah, let's hone in more on that word culture shock. What were some of the bigger culture shock moments that you remember? Do you think that there could have been something that you could have learned beforehand that would have helped you have less of that? I mean, I think that's part of the experience. I don't necessarily think it's bad. It's going to be something that often I think is beautiful to see the differences that we have, but while all still being human. But were there any moments that you kind of stood out to you guys for those culture shock moments?
Yeah, the food. Oh my God, it surprised me the most. I'm used to like Mexican cuisine here in the United States, or like from people from como Mexico, El Salvador, comido como like food like that. And so Spanish food is very European mixed with Spanish, mixed with a lot of cultures because they've had like a lot of dynasties ruled since like its inception. So definitely the food was the biggest part for me, probably the food and like the cultural activities that we did. But I was very happy to try new things because I love to like try new culture, like cultural foods. And I got a lot of that at my homestay when she would cook for us.
I also I also experienced some culture shock. Some of the food was different, and there was also one thing one thing I realized was that I remember how the United States is culturally a dominant country, and usually more of its things get exported to other countries. But I realized that Botswana is not that way, and there's a lot of British or South African influence, which was a bit of a culture shock. Like I remember hearing about things in England, like, oh, there's a popular restaurant, and it was like everywhere in Botswana, or this clothing brand, it was like South African, and it was like in every single mall. So definitely not seeing as many American brands was a culture shock, as well as some of the food was a bit of a culture shock as well.
Madison, can we go into a little bit about the homestay experience? I think that for a lot of students of color, that can be something that is a little bit nerve-wracking. I mean, for students in general, to go into a stranger's home for the first time, and especially when there's a language barrier. But if you could tell us a little bit more about what that experience was like, and if topics of race ever came up with your homestay.
Yeah, I think I loved where I lived during my time abroad. I was in a little apartment on the third floor in a dorm style room. And so I only had a host mother and her dog and my roommate that was from here in New Mexico. So definitely I was very apprehensive because you want to be respectful when you come into someone's home, anybody's home, regardless. And to know that I'd be sharing a home with a stranger in essence for a month was a little nerve-wracking, and especially not knowing like who my roommate would be. But I did, when I first got there and I met my host mother for the first time, she gave me a big hug and she was like, welcome, thank you for coming, like, how was your flight? Just like regular chat. And I was like, oh my God, I was flustered. I was trying to kick my Spanish into gear because, you know, the Duolingo does not help. So definitely it was a big learning moment, but it's also like as CIEE makes sure that like the host families that are there to really support you and truly care about the students. And that's what I felt like. That's how I felt during my stay.
Awesome. And then program leaders, I think, tie into all of this too. So the program leaders are kind of like the chaperones / translators / shoulders to cry on if you're feeling homesick / medicine buyers if you need some Advil, you know, all these kind of things. Can you tell us what your program leaders were like? Were any of them Black? Were any of them of color? Were any of them locals? And what were they like as far as helping you feel more comfortable and more at home on the program, and especially if any identity ever tied into that?
Yeah, so I was in level 3, language level 3 in Spain. So my program leader was a local, and he was a art student actually in college. And I really felt like his input, or like his commentary on what we would see out in public, or just about the historical background of the country, really helped like bridge like my understanding and what I was seeing day to day, and just like different mannerisms that Spaniards have, like saying vale. That was something new to me. Like they vale all the time. So now I say vale, and it's just this. I think it's better to learn from a local who's lived there and to trust and guide you into the process of like what it means to like live day to day. What are the interactions you're going to have with people? And also saying, don't be afraid to go up to people and ask them questions, because that's how you learn. Nobody learns without asking questions. So definitely when we did like Misión Iña every day and we had to go out and talk to people, that was a time to really just experience it all with the locals and just get stepping out of your comfort zone. And CIEE does a good job.
The full name of the podcast, Out of the Comfort Zone. Way to tie it in. How about you, Carter? What was the program leader experience like for you?
I think what CIEE did, they did a really good job of having the two main program leaders. One was American and one was a local recent grad from Gaborone University, I believe it was called. And so I think, and the one local was Black. And I think, as I mentioned earlier about the whole private school experience, she was more understanding, and she was like, oh, I've heard of that before. Still don't be afraid to go and meet with people. And the one from America was able to explain some of the different cultural differences. She had been on that same program before, so she was able to say, okay, I understand this. You may experience this, but I feel like because of the balance, one American, one local, I was able to have like a link between understanding the local culture from the local, and also having like someone to fall back on and more relate to with the American counselor.
Awesome. Yeah. We're also talking about two very different programs, a language and culture program, homestays, immersed in language, Spanish all day, every day, and then a topic program. So while we're talking about this and talking about two different continents, there's going to be a lot to compare and contrast. But I would like to hone in a little bit more on language. I learned Spanish a little bit with my family growing up on my dad's side, but very, very little. And I became fluent in an immersive study abroad experience, much like what you guys both went on. So what was using both languages, Spanish and Sevilla, and then what language? There's a lot of different languages in Botswana, right? What language were you speaking more of?
Setswana was the language that we learned, but Botswana, like 90% of the population, I believe, can speak English, so we mostly spoke English. But yeah, Setswana was what we learned.
Okay. And so on both of those programs, being exposed to different language and using it and everything like that, were there any difficulties? Learned a lot in your growth with the language. We'll stick that one for Madison more as the thematic program is more about the theme of the program. So we can hear more about the theme of the program after. But Madison, what was it like using Spanish all day, every day? Did you grow a lot? Did you learn a lot?
I grew a lot, but I also had to stop using English as a crutch because a lot of people don't speak English there. And so I remember a specific instance where I was trying to communicate with my host family, and I had brought like some Mexican candy that I eat here over to Spain to like kind of introduce her to like the things I like eat on a day-to-day basis. And she was like, "Yeah, I don't understand what you're saying." And I was like, oh my God, okay. It's a lot of you have to take some parts of your sentence out and replace it with vocabulary that may be like more universal. So definitely using the language every day was an experience because I felt like I was learning a completely new like dialect from what I was using.
For sure.
It was the same like structure, but it was just different application of words, and some words were more common, other words were not. So I definitely think that I remember we had to take our test and being nervous to like speak to my professor for my language placement. So I definitely feel that like over the course of a month, you develop like a lot. You develop mentally, but you also want to develop linguistically. And so our morning lectures in the morning where we had to sit in class with our professor, go over our language, and just do our different projects. And then the application when we went out onto the street and talked in public. and then bringing it home to our host family where we had to talk about our day. It was always like steps in the process to learn, but also to practice with other people. So that's why I feel like I was able to develop way more than I would here because I only spoke Spanish because that's all I could do.
So can you explain a little bit of like what a thematic program is as opposed to like a language program? What were you immersed in? What were you doing day to day? And did language ever come into play then?
So a thematic program is where your program has a concentration on a specific subject you will learn about. It could be cultural related, like art. Mine was a STEM program. I know certain parts of the world have like women in STEM and something more technology related. But I personally did a focus on wildlife conservation. And so the thematic programs usually are related to your nearby surroundings. Like mine was wildlife and conservation because there were a lot of conservatories, reserves, and parks in Botswana. And as far as language coming up, we did have a few language lessons. I learned a bit from them, but I feel like especially the first one was 2 hours. And because of all the terms, we were kind of like, by the end of it, we were struggling to remember everything. But I tried being nice by speaking a bit of Setswana at certain places I went. And people sometimes giggled at my pronunciation, and also people at certain, like if I would eat at a restaurant, like when I was picking up my food, they say, "Hey, do you know a band?" They would sometimes ask me to speak a little bit. So it came up in those situations, but obviously not as much as cultural and language programs.
All right. So you're there, you're abroad, you're having a good time, you're seeing nature reserves, you're speaking a whole bunch of Spanish. But was there any point during that time where you're just like, oh man, I wish I had known this before I came here. I wish I had brought this. I wish I had been prepared for this. Any like knowledge that you can pass on to the cohort that's thinking about going to either Sevilla or Gaborone or anywhere abroad with us this summer? What's some tips that you could pass on to them?
I'd say really socialize with your group or your cohort, like when you first meet at the airport, because you'll meet a lot of different interesting people, and it'll make your conversations better. It'll be like, if we had a certain experience, I'd say, "Hey, were you familiar with this?" And then like someone who was from, like, let's say North Carolina, could almost like in a way relate more to experience. Like someone who had a farm, when we visited a farm, was like, "Oh, I remember this. I can relate to this." So I'd say definitely don't look at yourself as maybe being different. Like a lot of people in your cohort are likely on a very new experience. So meet them as soon as you can, and you will have a great time connecting with them.
I definitely agree with Carter. This trip is like a social magnet, like a social just meetup with a bunch of different people from a bunch of different places. So you can't really survive like just keeping to yourself. You have to interact, you have to communicate with people, and you have to step outside your comfort zone, literally. Because, yeah, I mean, it depends. That a quiet person will make the world of difference from like being quiet and just trying to talk to people. I did not take a group flight to Sevilla. I went by myself personally, so I didn't get to meet up with a lot of my peers beforehand, but I definitely felt the love. Like once we got here, once we got all acclimated into at the hotels, when we met everybody for the first time, we were just all happy to be there. But I would say like something that I didn't really that didn't really get covered before I went was like money and exchange. So my mom actually sent me to Spain with US money, and you can't use it. They don't take any American money. So I definitely was very scared because I didn't have any efectivo per se. So definitely just like money exchange and just being knowledgeable about that is probably my biggest. You need to know this.
Yeah, just for everybody listening in the coming days, just Google it. Google it and figure out what to do to take care of it. Or you could talk to us too. We're here to help. That's what our job is too, to help you figure out that kind of stuff. But Google's helpful too. So your time was awesome. Sounds like for both of you. What did you bring back from your time abroad? And then, to Carter, I just want to hear more about like what did you bring back after being a majority as opposed to being a minority from your time there? What life lessons did you learn? And then I have another follow-up question about that kind of whole thing of coming back for you, Madison.
As far as life lessons, I'd say definitely always sit back and enjoy what you're doing, because it really went by fast. And also just always to reflect on your different experiences. Like, I think a good thing CIEE did was show us the different lives of different people in Botswana. And even if you go to a new place, acknowledge that there are different narratives. Like, admittedly, when we spent a day with like one of the kids from the private schools, I know it was like more of a upper middle class lifestyle, and you could see, oh, these people work this job and they own this farm and they employ these people. But we also knew that, hey, even though there's a lot of great stories, there's unfortunately some poverty in certain areas. So always acknowledge that there will be multiple sides to many different stories. Also, what I took back was that as far as being in the majority, one thing I noticed was there were just throughout the country, I'd say, more cultural markers of the dominant culture or the majority. Like, I was also in I believe my family who I spent the day with was Christian. So they're like, oh, this is this model. It represents this missionary. Oh, if you look over there, you can see this. It represents this type of heritage, or that statue of that person. I can relate to them this way. So I definitely got that new perspective.
I love that. I love the acknowledging the multifaceted identities and context that everybody has everywhere. And I think that's something that I've always taken away from my experiences abroad as well, is that, we're coming at this life thing from completely different angles a lot of the time, but we're still all humans living life. And as crazy as everything that goes on inside my own head and my own identities and all of the different things that make up me, that can be applied to everybody around the world. And so I think it's cool that you were able to tease some of that out from your time in Botswana. And then as far as your time in Spain, coming back, I think learning Spanish is kind of like clave. It's super key for Southern California. Have you been able to speak a lot of Spanish since you've been home and use it much in LA? Probably.
I have, definitely. Like the majority of my neighbors are Spanish speakers. So I find myself outside way more, just interacting with my community, won't like interacting with the public. At work, I do have like a lot of Spanish speakers that come in. So it gives me like, it makes me happy when I can like take their order, communicate with them in Spanish, and like just like deliver like a service, but also like get closer to the people that are around me. I think like speaking Spanish has definitely, it's opened a lot of doors for me. Like, being able to study abroad and speak another language and then bring that home. It's inspired me to like pursue it in college as like a major or like a minor. So I definitely think that my trip didn't stop when my plane landed at LAX. It didn't stop there. It's more like a lifelong thing that I can take with me. That's like a unique experience that I won't ever be able to get back. So I definitely cherish it for everything that it's taught me.
And did you come back with any of the Spanish accent? You said you say vale sometimes now. When you're talking with people that are more used to like the Mexican or Mexican American Spanish, can they tell that you spent time in Spain?
A little bit. I was so scared that I would not come back, but like come back like not having, I was like, what more can I learn if I already like know the language? It's not about that mindset. It's about being open to learning new things. And I definitely got at that. My vocabulary range expanded like 10 times, tenfold. So that was one of my happy like moments. And my accent, I love it so much. Like people are like, oh, like people ask me like, oh, what part of South America are you from?
There you
I'm
go.
like, no, not me, but thank you.
I know.
And
I love that.
so definitely, I love it, and I just have to maintain it.
Yeah. I mean, you're in a good spot to be able to do that. Like you said, just talk to your neighbors, keep up the mission, and yeah. I think it's interesting too when it comes to like Spanish, because like I find myself often code switching, which is something that I do and have done for my whole life in English. Was kind of as just a way of life, right? I will speak a certain way when I'm with my Black side. I'll speak a certain way when I'm with my Chicano side. I speak a certain way when I'm in like a more formal public setting for work, and I speak a certain way when I'm just with friends, with homies. So I think when Spanish comes into that too, I found myself like when I'm wanting to communicate with Mexican Americans or Mexicans more, I won't say stuff like vos. I'll try to say tú. I don't know if you've experienced anything like that, Madison, like where you wanted to sound more like one way or the other in your time in Spain. Were you doing anything like that, code switching?
Yeah, because I think the majority of the Spanish I've learned has been in the classroom, but there's also like a different way you talk to people just in regular passing conversation. So learning how to like differentiate formality versus familiarity was very important. I talk informally with my friends all the time because I don't talk to them like we do in class, but it's just like you just have to find where your Spanish applies to and just like staying true to yourself.
Stay true to yourself. Excellent. So like we said, there's a lot of students making decisions right now. There's a lot of students that are getting ready to go. What would you say to students of color or Black students specifically that are thinking about going abroad and Black students who are thinking about going to your locations? What is some like the pitch to convince them, or some tips and some tricks, some really important stuff that you'd like to impart to them?
I would say be open, acknowledge that different locations will give you a different experience. And as far as coming to Botswana, it's really great, really nice people there culturally really want to talk to you. Like I remember we were in a marketplace, and there's this guy who came up to me. I was like, oh, this is my first time abroad. I was like trained to think, oh no, maybe I shouldn't necessarily interact with these strangers. Then I realized like a few hours later, I was like, oh, maybe he was just trying to be nice. So be open to different cultural customs. And Botswana is a great place filled with great culture that you don't hear much about, I'd say, in the United States. And it's a really interesting culture that you'll find pretty amazing.
I remember too, at one point you were telling me that people were calling you Mbappe.
Oh yes. So at the public school, I was going there, and so even though I have hair now, before I went to multiple places last summer, so I was like, I just got all my hair taken off since I knew I wouldn't get a haircut from my barber for a while. So like I had like barely any strands of hair there, like Mbappe's haircut. So like some of the younger kids, they might have been like the equivalent of fourth grade. They're like, "Oh, are you Mbappe? Are you related to Mbappe?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm his third cousin," which is not true, but I did I told them that I told the truth to the older ones. I was like, "Yeah, I'm not related to him," but it was definitely really funny. So, yeah.
Madison, any tips, knowledge that you want to impart? Why is Sevilla the best place to go?
Sevilla is the best place to go because if anywhere, that's where I felt the most at home. That's where I felt the most at home during my time there. I think for anybody like on the fence about whether they're deciding to study abroad or not, you have to realize that home will always be here, and the opportunity to study abroad may not be, and especially in high school. And that was a big push factor for me, just knowing that you, as much as anybody, deserve to be here, and you deserve to take up space, and you deserve to experience everything else everybody does. So I remember I was with my friends and we had a free day on Saturday. And so Sevilla is a very walkable city, a very like public transportation city. So we got on the bus and we got lost. We were very, very, very far from where we needed to be. But it wasn't like a, oh my God, we're freaking out moment because we don't know what to do. But it's more like, oh my God, we're lost in Spain, in a city we don't know. Let's see how we're going to figure this out. Let's see how we're going to get home. What else can we see while we're here? So perspective is definitely a big part of your experience. And you just have to approach it with the mindset that things may go wrong, but you're equipped enough to figure out and solve the issue.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super good. If you come with an open mind, you come with a problem-solving ideas, and that you're there to experience, even if there's bumps, that's, I think, makes a world of difference. That's super good advice. I again want to just thank you both for not only today, but everything that you did with me when I was on your campus. Venice is a super cool school. I love going there because I get to present alongside awesome alumni like yourselves. And like I said, like over $100,000 in scholarships for your school. Part of that is because of these conversations that we're having here that we were able to have in front of your peers. And I wish you both the best in your next steps. And I already know that you're going to go far because you're able to tease out awesome meetings like this and present alongside me, both in a virtual space and in public, real life space. Either of you want to add specifically? It's a question that I didn't ask, or some specific stuff that maybe you wanted to really share before we wrap up?
I'd say I know this was more focusing on our experience as Black students, so I didn't get to talk as much about the wildlife, but I just want to add the wildlife is really cool. It's a great experience. That's really good.
What was the favorite thing that you saw, and when did you see it, and how?
Favorite thing that I saw had to have been the elephants, because I remember like we walked up and like we saw in the distance some coming to our tour guides like, oh, come over here, this is going to be interesting. And I guess a younger elephant was trying to like walk into an older elephant's territory, so they had a bit of a confrontation. Since elephants aren't the most like mobile animals, they just like exchange like tusk swings, and I guess the younger one walked off. That was definitely my favorite thing.
That's super cool.
I think my favorite part about my trip was being able to climb one of the bell towers at the Catedral de Sevilla. And when we also went to, I love climbing. I never climbed a bell tower. It's very high and it's very hot inside, but very fun.
I just want to thank you both as well. This conversation was, I think, amazing. I loved hearing everything that you guys had to say. I loved all of your insight. Honestly, I told you that we usually talk for an hour and cut it down to a half hour. And the whole time I'm like, we can't cut this down. This is all so good. And thank you for being such ambassadors for CIEE. I don't know if you guys know, but I work with alumni. That's my job, is to work with the student alumni. And so it's so cool to see, more alumni doing amazing things and the impact that you've had at your high school. And I'm so glad that you've had the amazing experience that you did. And I hope that you keep going back abroad many, many times and keep in contact with CIEE. And thank you to Dan as well for telling me about Madison and Carter and bringing you guys on here, because, man, this was such a good conversation, and you guys are amazing kids and amazing young adults. And I'm so excited for your futures. And Carter, you're the first boy on our podcast, by the way. So this was also a milestone.
Thank you for listening to Out of Your Comfort Zone. For more information on high school study abroad programs, visit ciee.org/global navigator.